Well, hey there, friends. I'm your host, Penny, and this is Criminally Nerdy. How are you doing, my favorite humans? I'm 5 feet over instead of 6 feet under, so it's a good day. I don't usually think to share funny personal stories with you guys because it just doesn't cross my mind, but this one just happened, so I wanted to tell you guys about it. I was taking like a little mental breather at work, and so I put both headphones in and I was just like TikToking it up for a minute, and I came across this video and it was the isolated vocals, which I thought was called a cappella. Are they two different things? Please advise. It was of Blink-182's Feelin' This. And the harmony was like so soothing that I just put my head back on my chair and like took it in, closed my eyes, mouthed the words, all of it. And so no one ever really comes into my office. So of course it's at this moment that someone comes in, but I don't realize they're there because they don't say anything. When I open my eyes, I'm like, oh shit. And they're like, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't want to interrupt because I thought you were praying. And I just got to thinking like, I'm okay with that. Like, have we not established the Church of Blink-182? Because maybe we should. In podcast world, I wanted to give a shout out to my mom. She has been crazy supportive from before day one when this podcast was just an idea that I had, and she bought me my first microphone and my first like set of headphones, and she sends me encouragement at random. Like, she just knows when I need a boost to keep going. Moms are magical, and mine is especially so. So I just wanted to say thank you, Mom, for always having my back. You are the best. I would also like to give a shout out to the Gutted Horror podcast. If you guys are a horror movie fan like I am, please go check them out. You will not be disappointed, I promise you. I also wanted to say thank you guys for continuing to spread the word. We've picked up some new listeners in some new areas. Hello, everyone. I have had some people ask me where to leave a review, and if you've never left one, I guess I understand that. If you are on Apple Podcast, go to the Criminally Nerdy podcast page and scroll all the way to the bottom. There, you can leave a star review and a written review. If you are on Spotify, again, go to the Criminally Nerdy podcast page, and where it says more, you can click on that, and there's an option to leave a star review. There isn't a place to leave a written review, but I'm going to start doing polls after each episode on Spotify. Sometimes they'll be related to the case, sometimes they'll be about what you guys might want to hear in the future, and sometimes I might just get goofy with it, so you'll have to take a look and see. Aside from subscribing, rating, and reviewing, of course, you can always tell your friends if you think they'd be interested, and you can also share the podcast on your socials if you want to let everyone know what kind of weirdness you pour into your ears. I also shout out my email at the end, but I wanted to let you guys know that I do that for a reason. I would love for you to reach out to me anytime if there's a case you'd like to hear, if there's something you would like to not hear, like if there's something in particular that I fucked up, whatever. If you are just like having a shitty day and you want to vent, my inbox is always open, so please feel free to email me anytime. criminallynerdypodcast@gmail.com. This episode is airing on July 22nd, which, among other celebrations, is National Hammock Day. I mean, come on. I cannot think of a better excuse. So, call into work. Spend your day getting your zen on by laying and swaying in a hammock. You deserve it. It is also National Sophia Day, so if your boss has a problem with your much-needed self-care day, ask yourself, what would Sophia from the Golden Girls do? Or, what would Sophie Turner, who played Sansa Stark, the Queen of the North, do? Pick whichever suits you best today and run with it. Today, we will be discussing Alaska's most notorious serial killer, a loving husband and father, a well-liked member of the community who people recall they would greet by name when they visited his bakery, a man who was quiet and unassuming. When they found out about his double life of abducting, raping, and psychologically terrorizing women by hunting them down in the woods like prey before murdering them, the utter shock made their blood run cold. This is the case of Robert Hansen, also known as the Butcher Baker. Be warned, this is a rough one. We will be discussing sexual assault, stalking, rape, torture, and murder. Also, as the title gives away, this is going to be a two-parter. There is a lot to get through in this case, so I decided the best way to get it all covered in the detail that it deserves is to stretch it out over 2 episodes. Some of my sources for this case were All Things Interesting, LelandHale.com, who is the man who wrote the book The Butcher Baker, the ID show Very Scary People, and the accompanying ID podcast called Mind of a Monster, The Butcher Baker. It is a 7-part series that does an incredible deep dive on this case, and I strongly recommend checking it out if you want to get every little detail. I mean, they did an amazing job. July 17th, 1980 was a cool Alaskan summer day when Detective Maxine Farrell of the Anchorage Police Department got a call that remains had been found in a small native village of Eklutna, a little over 20 miles south of Anchorage. Originally, the body had been buried in a shallow grave, but over time, the local wildlife had gotten to it. When Detective Farrell arrived to help process the scene, there wasn't much left to work with, but some of the clothing was still intact. The remains of the unidentified body were taken to the coroner's office. They were able to determine that it was that of a young woman between the ages of 16 and 25. She had been dead for several months based on the state of her remains. Her cause of death was determined to be a stab wound to the back. Unable to be identified, she eventually became known as Eklutna Annie. Eklutna Annie wasn't the only case of a murdered young woman. Just a few days earlier, on July 9, 1980, the body of Joanne Messina, a 24-year-old dancer who had been reported missing on May 19th of that year after not returning from a camping trip, had been found in Seward, Alaska. It was a horrible scene. She had been shot twice by a .22 caliber revolver and dumped into a gravel pit. Wildlife had gotten to her body and she was severely compromised. Her belongings and her dog, who had also been shot, had been thrown into the woods. Detective Chuck Miller was appointed to her case, but there were very few leads to follow. Just over a year later, 23-year-old Sherry Morrow was reported missing by her boyfriend. He was able to provide a detailed description of her, what she was wearing, and most importantly, that she had a golden arrowhead necklace that she always wore. Sherry was also a dancer at one of the many strip clubs on 4th Avenue in Anchorage, the street which was famously quoted by Bob Hope as being the longest bar in the world. Not only was Anchorage home to a large military base, but it was also where many people working on the pipeline called home. The Trans-Alaska Pipeline stretches 800 miles. It began construction in 1969 and was not completed until 1977. During that time, over 77,000 people worked on it. This brought in many from the lower 48. While some only stayed for a short time, the population of Anchorage doubled between 1970 and 1980 with those who decided to stay. With the influx being primarily men, companies like Talents West saw a need and wanted to bank on it. They knew that after a long day, these men were going to want to unwind. And what better way to do that than to have a drink in hand and look at some beautiful women dance? The problem was, Talents West wasn't exactly what you would call on the up and up. Talents West, a Seattle-based adult entertainment company, was known to have mafia affiliations at that time. They advertised to young women that they would pay for their travel and lodging if they would agree to go to Alaska to be dancers, where they were promised to make lots of money. For a young woman looking to get away, it was the perfect setup, on the surface. What they didn't realize they were signing when they signed the waiver was that they had to work for free until the cost to get them to Alaska had been repaid. If you thought of running off before your debt had been repaid, they would track you down and bring you back to finish the length of your contract, which was not a stretch of time, but an amount of money. After that, the girls were allowed to work as what you might describe as an independent contractor. Instead of being paid by the clubs and tipped by the customers, they were only given their tips and made to pay the club a fee for being given the stage time. The girls were encouraged to upsell customers on drinks, table dances, lap dances, and other services. Lots of money, hundreds, even thousands of dollars could be made in a weekend depending on what kind of services you offered. Sherry Morrow's roommate, Susan, recalled that if you were considered to be a good girl, it would take a lot longer. It took her 9 months to pay off her debt before she started making any money of her own. She said that she and Sherry were both considered to be good girls because they were not interested in the extra services, so they primarily worked day shifts and only danced in the topless bars, not the bottomless bars. Susan recalls the last time she saw Sherry, she had walked her to an appointment that she had with a man who had offered to pay her $300 to take nude photographs of her. Susan recognized the man Sherry was meeting as she had actually met him before while dancing. He was an average-looking man, unassuming if anything. They spoke and he told her about his airplane. He asked her strange questions like if she had family in the area. He also asked her if she would be interested in a date, which was a term often used when a man wanted to pay a woman for sex. She had declined not only because she wasn't interested, but because the man gave her a very strange feeling. When Sherry didn't return from her appointment, Susan was certain that the man had done something to her, but she was too scared to go to the police. Talents West had made it very clear that women were never to go to the police. If they had a problem, they were to report it to the agency and they would take care of it. They threatened that the police wouldn't believe them anyways, and they would only be putting themselves in danger of being arrested if they had taken part in sex work. It was a scare tactic that worked on many of the women in the area. Susan knew what the man looked like, and worse, she knew that he knew what she looked like and where she worked. Gripped with fear, she immediately quit her job and fled Alaska. And this information about the man, what he looked like, and his airplane wouldn't make it to police until much, much later. Since Sherry was a dancer, unfortunately, law enforcement had the assumption that she had just taken off, even though she had been reported missing. They had bigger fish to fry when it came to the crime rate in Alaska. At the time, it was nearly double that than the crime rate in Chicago. But Detective Maxine was different. She took it seriously. She added Sherry's missing persons case to the other 7 she already had of missing dancers and sex workers. Detective Farrell had already had a suspicion that this was the work of a serial killer. She knew that though people would come and go from the area, they would always turn up somewhere else. This many women vanishing without a trace from 4th Avenue was no coincidence. She voiced her suspicions to a local journalist and found herself in some pretty hot water with her supervisors. They made her retract her statement and advised that she abandon her theory, saying that she was only going to needlessly panic the public. Officer John Daly had recently purchased 24 acres of land off of the Knik River and was planning to eventually build a home on the property. Since it was just sitting there vacant, he and his buddy decided it would be the perfect place to have a boys' weekend of hunting, fishing, and camping. After docking and setting up camp, they began their hunt, but were stopped in their tracks when they discovered a body in a shallow grave. This was before cell phones, so it wasn't something they could simply call in. Due to the weather and terrain, they had to camp for the night before going into town the next day to report what they had found. Officer Daly remembers fearing that the killer could still be in the area. The next day, on September 10, 1982, they went back to town and reported what they had found. Investigators arrived and found the body of a young woman whose head had been completely wrapped with an ace bandage. A .223 shell casing was found along with her body. The autopsy revealed that it was the body of Sherry Morrow and that she had been killed by a single gunshot wound to the heart. Something to note about the .223 caliber shell is that it is a powerful piece of ammunition. It is only used in high-caliber rifles and is used to kill large game. This one casing told detectives immediately that they were dealing with an experienced hunter. Though tragic to find that one of her missing women was now a homicide case, Detective Farrell was now more convinced than ever that this was the work of a serial killer who was targeting young dancers and sex workers in Anchorage. The public was also voicing their concern about the number of missing women and the seriousness of the fact that now 3 bodies had been found. State troopers addressed the mounting suspicions, stating, quote, "There is nothing to indicate that the disappearances are anything other than a coincidence." Detective Farrell's superiors warned her again to stop pursuing her theory, but she did not listen. "You fucking go, Maxine." Another missing persons report came across Maxine's desk in April of 1983 of 30-year-old dancer Paula Goulding. The number of women missing in the area had now grown to 12, and Maxine had 3 main suspects. There was a transient man from Hawaii who came to Alaska for work and would disappear for long periods of time. There was another man who she had received multiple complaints about from parents around town, saying that this gentleman would approach their teenage daughters and ask to take pictures of them. 100% not O-fucking-K, my dude. The third suspect on her list was the most unsuspecting at first glance. He was a soft-spoken man who wore glasses, didn't stand out in a crowd, and seemed to most to be completely harmless. He wasn't a large man, standing at only 5'7" and weighing between 170 and 180 pounds. He was on her list because he was known to frequent the topless and bottomless clubs on 4th Avenue. His quiet, harmless demeanor would sometimes give off a creepy vibe, and he happened to own a bakery just around the corner from where all the bars and clubs were. Wouldn't you know it, he was also a very well-known hunter in the area. His name was Robert Hansen. Robert Hansen was the oldest of 2 children. He was born on February 15, 1939, in Esterville, Iowa, to Chris and Edna Hansen. The family moved to California when Robert was 3, but returned to Iowa in 1949, settling in the city of Pocahontas. Robert's father opened the Pocahontas Home Bakery. He was described as very domineering and demanded a lot from Robert. He would have his young son come into the family bakery at 2 a.m. to start the workday and then send him off to school. Aside from the lack of sleep that is crucial to a child's development, Robert also struggled with a speech impediment, dyslexia, and oddly enough, being left-handed. It was considered a struggle because this was a time when being left-handed was considered to be wrong. Some even called it the devil's hand. So he was forced to use his right hand, making his time in school far more difficult than it needed to be. As a child and even a teenager, he had always been described as a bit of a loner. His classmates considered him to be meek and kind of boring. As he got older, he was teased for his stutter and because he had a severe case of acne that wound up leaving permanent pockmarks on his face. He didn't like to speak up in class and avoided it at all costs. His academic performance was categorized as below average. Reflecting on it later, Robert would say that he absolutely hated school. Working for his father had paid off because Robert had learned the ins and outs of the bakery business and was actually quite good at it. Aside from that, he enjoyed hunting and archery. After graduating from high school, Robert enlisted in the United States Army Reserve in 1957. He was discharged after only 1 year for reasons that I could not find. Upon his discharge, he moved home with his family for a short time, where he worked as an assistant drill instructor for the police academy and worked as a volunteer firefighter. He got married in mid-1960 to a younger woman, but I really couldn't find much about his first marriage. Robert carried a deep resentment inside towards the town and the people in it who had rejected him throughout his life. In July of 1960, there was a game taking place between the 2 high schools in Pocahontas, and 21-year-old Robert knew that the whole town would be there to watch. I'm not sure if the 16-year-old boy with Robert that evening was someone he was friends with or worked with or just acquainted with, but somehow Robert talked him into being his accomplice in exacting his revenge. The school bus barn was just a few hundred yards away from where the basketball game was taking place, so Robert and his accomplice went and poured gasoline on the roof, lit a match, and set it on fire. It was completely destroyed in front of the whole town. There was no financial motivation for this. The only thing to be gained was that Robert released some of the aggression he had pent up inside towards the town. Robert also had the perfect alibi. He hightailed it out of there and went back to the fire station where he volunteered, where he then threw on his gear and went to assist in putting out the fire he had started. It looked like he was going to get away with it until his accomplice couldn't handle the guilt and rumors any longer. He went to the police and confessed what he and Robert had done. On December 7th, 1960, Robert was arrested and pled guilty to arson. He was sentenced to 3 years, of which he only served 19 months. While incarcerated, his wife filed for and was granted a divorce. His parents were so embarrassed by his actions that his father sold the bakery and moved the family to Minnesota, where they purchased and ran a resort. When Robert was released from prison, he went to live with them for a short time. While in Minnesota, he met his second wife, a teacher named Darla, in 1963. She was smart and kind, very giving, and deeply religious. At Robert's suggestion, the couple packed up and moved to Alaska in 1971. Alaska was known as the place to go if you wanted to start over. When they settled in Alaska, Darla took a teaching position while Robert worked at a local bakery as a cake decorator. Eventually, Robert opened his own bakery. Darla continued teaching while taking classes to earn credits towards her master's degree. They had 2 children and attended church every Sunday, with Darla volunteering at church functions as often as she could. They were the definition of your all-American family. Robert worked opposite hours of Darla, which was common for a baker to be in at almost a graveyard shift to ensure that they had fresh donuts, danishes, and coffee to serve the public when they opened. When the morning shift was over, he would go home and sleep during the day. He still kept his hobbies of bow and rifle hunting, often going for long hunting trips in the Alaskan wilderness. He was a very impressive hunter, actually setting the record for the largest Dall sheep kill with a bow. He preferred the bow because you had to get close to your prey, so he was not only skilled at tracking, but also in being stealthy. He had the ability to get close enough to kill his target without them even knowing he was there. But below the surface, there was something truly evil lurking in Robert. What Darla didn't know is that her husband was more often than not spending those late nights on 4th Avenue, frequenting bars and soliciting women. Robert had a multitude of issues, one of which being the incredibly disgusting way he categorized women. He said many times over the years that there were, quote, good girls and bad girls. Good girls were the ones like his wife, the ones he considered to be on the same level as he was. Bad girls were the ones he considered to be below him. Sex workers, dancers, loose girls, etc. 'Cause, this fuck is qualified to pass judgment. Sorry. Who am I kidding? No, I'm fucking not. But anyways, you'll want to keep that in your back pocket as we move forward. After only a year of living in Alaska, in November of 1971, Robert was at a stoplight when he looked over at the car next to him and saw an attractive young woman. She noticed him looking and gave him a slight smile and wave and went on about her way. Something in Robert's brain was triggered by this seemingly insignificant act of politeness. Unbeknownst to her, he proceeded to follow her home. The woman was 18-year-old real estate secretary Susie Hubbard. Once she arrived home, she went to take a shower. While she was in the shower, Robert had parked and gone to knock on her door. Not having time to get dressed, she threw on a towel and went to the door to see what was going on. She was surprised to see this man who she didn't know and had only passed at a stoplight for a brief moment, standing in her doorway asking to use her phone book because he needed to make a call. Oh, the 80s. Going against every instinct, she said all right and let him inside. Almost immediately, this married man, passing judgments on good girls and bad girls, asked if she would like to go on a date with him. She declined the offer and told him that she had a boyfriend. He left, but it didn't end there. Robert would later say that when he saw her at the stoplight, he thought she looked like a good girl. But the moment he saw her in the doorway wearing nothing but a towel, he put her into the lower than category. In his mind, this made her fair game. 1 week later, Susie went to start her car to warm it up at 5 a.m. when she was confronted by the man from the stoplight. He put a gun in her face, grabbed her by the arm, and told her to come with him. She began screaming and fighting back, getting the attention of her roommate. Her roommate immediately came to her aid, telling the man to let her go and that they had called the police. Spooked, Robert let go and took off. He ditched the gun and the hat that he had been wearing and just casually started walking down the street. Police arrived with the K-9 unit and got the description of the man who had assaulted Susie. They began searching and were able to find him within the hour. When asked why he was walking around in the Alaskan winter weather with no hat or coat, he said that he had been driving and began to feel woozy. He didn't feel like he was safe to drive, so he got out and decided to walk from there. This went over like a lead balloon. Police told him that he was a suspect in the nearby assault and attempted kidnapping. Robert said he knew nothing about it and said, "Well, if I did it, I don't remember it because I blacked out." Okay, Robert. The blackout excuse, really? The officers were more convinced of the existence of the tooth fairy than they were of this man's innocence. With Susie's positive identification, Robert was arrested for assault with a deadly weapon. Though it was a felony, he was released on his own recognizance, which basically means that instead of remaining in custody until your trial, you're free to go on your word that you will come back for your hearing. Ron Rice worked in the Criminal Investigation Unit for Anchorage PD and was assigned to Susie's case. He had a feeling that this wasn't going to be the last they would see of Robert Hansen, so with his own camera, he took a picture of him and put it in what would become known as the Asshole Book or the Perv Book, which contained photos of rapists, those suspected of sexual assault, peeping toms, and the likes. Robert Hansen was the first photo in that book. Not even a month later, in December of 1971, local dancer Patty Roberts had stopped at a cafe for some tea around 3 a.m. After ordering, she remembered that she had left her car running and needed to go turn the engine off. As she was walking back to her car, a man with a gun approached her, grabbed her, and forced her into his car. After driving down the road a bit, he stopped and binded her with shoelaces, telling her that if she did what he wanted her to, everything would be fine, but if she tried anything, he would kill her. They drove to the Kenai Peninsula, which was about 160 miles south of Anchorage. At various points throughout the drive, he removed items of her clothing so that she would be less likely to run away. Kenai is very remote, with only small pockets of people living in the area. Robert, knowing the area well, was aware of this. He took her to a motel where he repeatedly raped her. Patty was terrified that he was going to kill her, so she did her best to comply. Because of what he likely saw as obedience, he told her that he liked her. Seeing this as her way out, Patty did something very smart. She humanized herself. She told him about herself, including that she was a single mother with a young son who was probably wondering where she was since she never came to pick him up from her parents' house. He went through her purse and found a piece of paper with her son's name, her parents' names, and her parents' address on it. Believing that he now had leverage over her, he said that since he liked her, he would take her back, but if she ever said anything, he would kill her family. Shockingly, he did take her back. He returned her to her car, which was still parked near the cafe, and warned her again that he would become her worst nightmare should she decide to come forward with what happened. What Patty hadn't told him was that her father happened to be a state trooper. She was reluctant and didn't come forward right away, but eventually found the courage to file a complaint. The detective working her case happened to know about Ron Rice's book and asked Patty to take a look and see if anyone looked familiar. She immediately identified Robert Hansen. A warrant was issued and Robert was arrested again, this time for the kidnap and rape of Patty Roberts. He denied the allegations completely. He said that they had a dispute over money. He had agreed to pay a certain amount for her services. After they were finished, she hiked up the price, which he refused to pay. He said that she had fabricated the whole story because she was angry that she wasn't able to grift him. Go ahead and keep this in mind too. It'll become a running theme with this asshole. Robert is now facing charges for the assault with a deadly weapon against Susie Hubbard and the kidnap and rape of Patty Roberts. The assistant DA, concerned about Patty's credibility, offered Robert a plea deal. If he pled guilty to the assault with a deadly weapon charge against Susie, the real estate secretary, they would drop the kidnap and rape charges against Patty, the dancer. I sincerely hope the person who offered him that deal never got a good night's sleep again. Robert agreed and entered his guilty plea. In March of 1972, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. While incarcerated, he underwent a psychiatric evaluation due to his claim of not being able to remember the assault on Susie. At that time, they diagnosed him with schizophrenia and dissociative personality disorder. In his evaluation, it was noted that he had an infantile personality and was preoccupied with getting back at those who he felt had wronged him. He admitted to fantasizing about doing harmful things to women who rejected him. It was recommended that he needed counseling more than he needed prison. For sure, he needs therapy, but this dude just admitted that he fantasizes about harming people, and you think, nah, he doesn't need prison. Did you get your PhD from a Cracker Jack box? After serving only 3 months, you heard me correctly, 3 fucking months, model prisoner Robert Hansen was released to a halfway house. They felt he was redeemable. He had valuable skills that aided to the local economy through his business, and he was a family man with a wife and children. Robert would later say, quote, "Even when I was in the halfway house and I was only supposed to drive to and from work, I would drive uptown in a hurry and sit there and look at the prostitutes walking up and down the street." He said that what he had done with Patty excited him in a way that he had never been excited before, and he couldn't wait to do it again. He would also admit that he got a thrill from doing something he knew was wrong and getting away with it. As you can probably imagine, this slap on the wrist only emboldened him. The legal system had tossed out the charge on the woman he considered to be a bad girl and only upheld the charge on the one he considered to be a good girl. For Robert, it was a turning point. He interpreted this as it being okay to target women who he considered to be less than because he would get away with it. This set into motion a monstrous mindset that would be used to terrorize the women of Anchorage for the next decade. As far as run-ins with the law, not much else would be heard from Robert for a little while. He attempted to steal a chainsaw in 1976. It made absolutely no sense because he had plenty of money, he could have just bought it. He just wanted to see if he could get away with it. The theft charge was his 3rd felony. First there was the arson for the school bus barn, then the assault with the deadly weapon, and now this. They absolutely could have taken this chance to throw the book at him, but they didn't. Again, he was a family man. He went to church every Sunday. His wife said he was a good man. And I'm going to tell you guys right now, I'm not going to talk any shit about his wife. I've read quite a bit about her, and she seemed like a very lovely woman. I think she may have been in very deep denial about his problems, and when it came to things he would later be proven to have done, I believe she was wholly unaware because of the airtight excuses he would offer of his odd working hours and going on long hunting trips. I think she was standing up for him because he was her husband and the father of her children. She believed that these were just mistakes or misunderstandings and that everything could be fixed. I believe that Darla is also one of his victims because she had to live with the lasting consequences of his actions. Law enforcement, on the other hand, has no damn excuse. They were an impartial party. They chose to put on those rose-colored glasses, and it cost their community dearly. Robert was found guilty of the theft and sentenced to 5 years in prison. This time, he served 16 months. Being little Mr. Model Prisoner, he was released early with no parole, so he was under absolutely no supervision. In October of 1979, 19-year-old Christy Hayes was working as a dancer at the Embers nightclub when a man came into the bar. As instructed, she went over, offered him a drink and a table dance. He looked very unassuming. The only things standing out were his glasses and his acne scars. When she left at the end of her shift, he was waiting. He offered her $110 for a date. She agreed and he paid in advance. When they got to his camper, he pulled a gun on her. He told her not to scream and to take off all of her clothes. She was confused and paralyzed with fear. He repeated his request and told her that if she did not do what he asked, he wasn't going to be very nice. After she had taken her clothes off, he tied her wrists and ankles together behind her back with wire in the hog tie position and left her on the bed. She assumed that he was going to rape her, but he didn't. He started driving. It was in this moment that Christy realized this man was going to kill her. While he was driving, she was able to get loose from the wires. When he looked back and saw that she was trying to escape, he slammed on the brakes. The sudden stop sent her flying into the side of the camper and knocked her unconscious. When she woke up, he had just gotten out of the cab and was walking around to the door of the camper. Quickly, she crawled through the window between the camper and the driving cab, locked the doors and the windows. She was frantically looking for the keys so that she could drive away. He came to the driver's side and demanded that she unlock the doors and let him in. Screaming and crying, she refused. He was so enraged that he broke the driver's side window with his fist, spraying broken glass all around. She did the only thing she could. She unlocked the passenger door and began to sprint. Naked, with cracked ribs, bleeding from being sliced by broken glass, she ran through the woods, hitting rocks, trees, and sticks. She came to a fence and, in her own words, doesn't remember how, but was able to get over it. She found herself in the backyard of a suburban home. She went to the door and pounded, begging for them to help her. A woman opened the door and was shocked by the sight of this poor woman. She let her inside, gave her a robe, and called the police. Christy was stammering and terrified, telling the woman to be quiet and turn off the lights because there was a man out there with a gun who was looking for her. Thankfully, he didn't find her. The police arrived and took her statement, and that was about it. Even though she gave them a detailed description of the man and the vehicle, and there was broken glass and tire tracks on the road behind the neighborhood, they did little to follow up. In March of 1980, Christy was dancing at a different club when the same man with the acne scars and glasses walked in. She sprang into action and called the police, which her employers admonished her for, saying, "That's what bouncers are for." Fuck the bouncers. She didn't want him thrown out. She wanted him thrown in jail. Police arrived and Cindy identified him as the man she had reported attacking her 6 months earlier. His name was Robert Hansen. Robert cooperated with police and agreed to go in for a formal interview. During his interview, he admitted that he had picked Christy up in October. He agreed to pay for oral sex. After she was done, she demanded an additional $75. He said that when he refused to pay, she got upset and started screaming. He panicked at her behavior and threw her out of his camper van onto the street and took off. So, of course, APD does absolutely nothing. Robert faces no charges and walks free. But this time, he wasn't done. For the next 2 years, he stalked her. On one occasion, Christy recalls coming home and her neighbor telling her that a camper had been parked outside and the driver had been at her door. When the neighbor asked the stranger what he was doing, he claimed to be a locksmith. Christy hadn't called a locksmith. She went to her door and found that it had been kicked off the hinges. Inside, nothing had been stolen. Everything was left exactly as it had been. The only thing that had been disturbed was her underwear drawer, which had been rummaged through. She called the police to report the incident. They came and took her statement, but again, nothing was done. Terrified that he knew where she lived and could easily get into her home, Christy moved. After moving, one night she notices that her dogs are acting strange, which is like the biggest red flag ever. She hadn't seen or heard anything, but decided to go to the window to see what had them on edge. When she looked out the window, she saw Robert trying to pick her lock. She was so startled by the sight of him that she knocked something over, and the sound of it spooked Robert. He looked up, saw her looking at him through the window, and fled. She called the police to report the attempted break-in, but this time they didn't even show up to take her statement. They didn't take her seriously and was even quoted as considering her a bottom feeder. No, motherfucker, you, the one not doing your job, you are the bottom feeder. Even if police had done their jobs, connecting the dots wouldn't have been easy. Alaska was in the middle of converting all of their handwritten records into digital records. The process of uploading all of this information was long and arduous, which just so happened to work in Robert's favor. Depending on where and when they were looking him up, they may not have found anything, but that would soon change, and so would the attitude of law enforcement. Unfortunately, It would take a horrifying event to open their eyes to the very real problem they were facing. And that, my friends, is what we will discuss next time in our conclusion, part 2 of Robert Hansen, the Butcher Baker. That's all I've got for you today, my guys, gals, and non-binary pals. Please make sure to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you're listening so that you never miss an episode. If you would like to make a donation to the podcast, there will be a support the show link in the show notes, or you can go to buymeacoffee.com/criminallynerdypodcast. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at Criminally Nerdy Podcast, Twitter, X, whatever, at Crime Nerd Pod, or shoot me an email anytime at criminallynerdypodcast@gmail.com. Till next time, keep it nerdy. Take it in. Shoot. Shoot. Fail. What's a paker? Approved. No. Okay, fuck it. That's what you're getting. I've tried to say that word 5 times. Fuckity fuck shit. Come on, woman. Reported. How now, brown cow? So many S's. Pivot. Damn it. Fuck you. That's no good. No. Oops. God, I hate this guy. No fucking shit. That sounded stupid. This fucking piece of shit. Chick. Upset the panic. Cord. Words, motherfucker. Words. Bad sentence. Oh, fucking K. They don't know that we know that they know we know.